Hey you guys, it's Leanne with Paper Heart Scissors, and I promised a video about the different black inks that are out there, and I get really confused, and I just wanted to clear this up once and for all. And I have a downloadable PDF for you as well as a reminder. But what I did was I took the 6 inks that I have, and I want to, everybody always kind of puts them as, okay, you can use this one for that. And that doesn't really work for me. What I want to do is organize them by, if I want to do watercolor, which one should I use? And if I want to do embossing, which one should I use? And if I want to use copics, which one should I use? So I wanted to take a look at these 6 that are in front of you and their properties and do it completely fairly. So we'll start with our favorite Copic friendly ink, which is Memento, and it's Tuxedo Black. I love this ink. Oh, and I am working on Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. So everything that you're seeing is on the same paper. I'm going to use the same stamp, and we're going to start with the Memento Onyx Black. And I'm going to talk a little bit also about the color of the ink and the impressions that you get as well. So you know how pigment inks seem to be a little more juicy, and they kind of sit on the top of the paper where dye inks sink into the paper. The Memento is really acts much more like a dye ink, but it is intense black, and it will not fade or blur or run with the Copics. So now I am using Simon Says stamp Intense Black ink, which is meant for Copics alcohol markers. And it even says that on the box, which I really appreciate. Thank you, Simon, because the other black dye ink is actually more appropriate for watercolors and holds the watercolor better. But it's nice that they specify that this is for alcohol inks. And then we have Hero Art's Intense Black, and this is also supposed to be for a number of different uses. And I really felt like actually all 3 of these inks held the line for Copic markers equally. They all work beautifully, they don't blur, at least on the Nina. Now if you do use them on watercolor paper, there's a little bit of a difference, but they all looked and felt very much the same. I will say that the blackest one is still the Memento, and that they are not as black as what I'm going to show you here. So here is the Simon Says stamp regular black premium dye ink. This is not the intense black, this is just black dye ink. And you get a beautiful crisp impression. And then I went to the Ranger Archival Ink, which you can use to resist watercolor. And I will say that this ink I love because you get a really crisp, sharp amount of detail. And the black is really dark, and it works beautifully with watercolor. And then finally the VersaFine Black, which I think gives the best detail, but it is a pigment ink. However, it's perfect for embossing. If you want to do black embossing and put clear embossing powder on top of it, or even if you just want to stamp a really crisp black impression, then the VersaFine is for you, as long as you are using water and not Copic markers. So I noted all of them and their colors right next to them so that we would have no cheating going on here. And you can see the comparisons that I did. And I did these so that I could make the chart that I will have on my blog for you to download. So you can, but it's going to be a little different than other charts, because it's going to tell you that if you're going to want a watercolor, which ink you should use, and if you're going to want to use Copics, what ink you should use, in my opinion. This is only my opinion. Also, The Hero Arts, the Simon Intense Black, and the Memento, you can see there in comparison to the dye ink and the Ranger and the VersaFine pigment ink, they are not quite as black. Same paper, not quite as fine a detail and not as black. They're a little more, they soak into the paper a little bit more. They're a little fatter weight, and they're not quite as black. They're a little more gray. So that's just an interesting thing. You can see that the ones on the right are the VersaFine and the Ranger, and they're very black. And the ones on the left are kind of they're a little bit lighter. I want to say they're a deep charcoal gray instead of really being a true intense black. So now I'm starting with a Copic marker over the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black, and over the Memento, and over the Hero Arts Intense Black. And all three of those inks are meant to stand up to Copic markers, which are alcohol-based markers, and they all work equally as well, I think. There's no bleeding, the lines are very crisp, the color does not run. And what you'll see here is, and these have had, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes to dry, not a long time, but a little time to dry, so you could work with that as well if you don't have, but you can see that the VersaFine obviously runs. The Ranger, it has a little bit of bleed, and the Simon Says Stamp dye ink, once dry, it's better, but there is still a spreading of, so if you didn't have the Memento or the Hero Arts or the Intense Black of the Simon, then you could use the Simon Says Stamp dye ink, and just be careful not to flood it with color, because it will, as you start to add more ink to the paper, it will cause that black ink to bleed even more. So then I went ahead and I wanted to try some watercolor over the top of these, and I will tell you that Memento ink, it does bleed somewhat. It actually did fairly well on the Nina Solar White. However, if you try to use Memento and Copics on a paper with more cotton in it, like a watercolor paper, you will have more bleeding when you add the watercolor on top. So, you know, sometimes there's a look for this. If you were using a Memento colored ink and you wanted that bleeding edge, that could be something artistic that you want. But if you really want the line weight and the impression of the stamp to hold up, then it would be better if you went with either the Simon Says Stamp dye ink, the Ranger, or the VersaFine pigment ink. As you can see, those held up beautifully to the watercolor. And the opposite with the Memento and the Intense Black and the Hero Arts, and I'm really sorry that that's off camera, there you go. They run a little bit, and you can see that bleeding there. It's not a lot, but it is enough, and it's noticeable on more higher cotton content cotton content rag paper. So then I added also, and you can see this Simon Premium Dye Black ink, look how beautiful and crisp that is. The Ranger, it's beautiful, crisp, and black, same thing, where you can see that with the Copic it bled. And also for the VersaFine, once it's dry, it's beautiful with watercolor and very crisp. So you have some options there as well. So if you were only going to get 2 inks after all of this, I would say that you probably could do everything that you wanted to do with either the Simon Intense Black and the VersaFine, or the Memento and the Ranger, but you want to have one that works really well with Copics, and you want to have one that is also very water resistant. And so I will call that out in my chart. so that you can download it and you can keep it above your desk. I'll make you something really small. And then this is a Tombow watercolor marker. And again, as you see with the Memento, the Simon Intense Black, and the Hero Arts, it's slightly bleeding. Whereas with the Simon Premium Dye Ink and the Ranger Archival especially, did especially well with this. And the VersaFine, once it's dry, those three really are crisp and pure and let the purple shine through, and there's no bleeding. It's very tight and nice impression. And then the last ink that I wanted to make sure that I show you was another water-based, which was Distress Ink, which I used a marker here, but it's really the same. If you're going to spray water on something and you have used Distress Ink, either blended or maybe you've stamped it on top of a black impression and then you were going to spatter it. If you're not using one of the inks over here on the left, the VersaFine, the Ranger Archival, or the Premium Dye Ink from Simon, you will get a little bit of bleeding because that water is going to soak into the paper and make that black Memento VersaFine or Hero, I'm sorry, not Memento Simon Says Intense Black or the Hero Arts Intense Black. It's going to make it slightly bleed. So they really react with water but not with alcohol. And that's just a good thing to know as an all-around guide, but you can kind of see, you can see how that's bleeding. It's kind of poking, it's making the black spread out. Whereas if you look at it with the Archival ink or the Simon Premium Dye Ink, it's very crisp and smooth and it has not lost any of its tightness. The Ranger Archival is amazing. You can see, and as well the VersaFine, once it's dry, it really lost none of its intensity or its clarity with anything that was water-based. So I hope this solves all of our problems when we are looking at or in the middle of a project and we're like, I want to watercolor something and I don't want my ink to bleed. This is the chart that I made you, and you can see that it's organized by copic markers, watercolor, or embossing, and there's some notes on the side there. I hope that you find this helpful, and you can visit me on my blog or on Instagram or back here on YouTube. Subscribe or let me know your thoughts. If you like the channel, I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.